You're watching Next Pitch, the student athlete playbook for parents raising tomorrow's athletes.
To the doctor, and I told him that I broke my arm in 2 places. His advice: stop going to those places.
Oh, I love it. That's so good. That's coming out at dinner tonight. I can assure you that is coming out at dinner tonight. That is awesome. Okay. Since that one's so good, you get 2. Give me one more.
Okay. I asked my dog, what is 2 minus 2? He said nothing.
I like the first one better, but that's
I
damn
did
good too.
too.
Well, Dan, I thank you so much for doing this. I enjoyed it immensely. I believe our listeners are going to enjoy it immensely. Go get the book. It is fantastic, and looking forward to seeing what comes next for you. And we'll stay in touch, man. This has been a blast. I really appreciate you doing this.
Pleasure has all been mine. So much. Thanks so
All right.
much.
Have a great rest of your day. Thanks a bunch.
All the best.
Welcome back. Anthony Levrets here. Just finished up my interview with Dan Gold, and what a great dude. Really appreciate him coming on the show and talking about his book, Game Changers: Inspirational Sports Stories for Teens. Tons of good stuff. Fun interview. It's a fun read. It's a little different kind of sports book, very comparative of different kinds of athletes and their stories. I think you'll find it fascinating and also very beneficial to your kids. We covered most of the topics pretty deeply today, but I think it bears to be repeated that the lessons that we get from sports happen in between the wins and the losses. And if we can, we'll do everything that we can to accommodate that. So please feel free to reach out to me or Jason, and we're both easy to find. And if we can, we'll have them on the show. Speaking of having on the show, today we have the Amazon Books sports best-selling author, wrote the book Game Changers: Inspirational Sports Stories for Teens. And remarkable guy. Dan Gold is a former, I played, sports in high school, was not a college athlete, was a surgeon, then retired and got into writing and sort of accidentally got into writing books and accidentally published and now has the #1 selling book on Amazon for the category of sports. And it is a remarkable read. I've read it. It is actually, I've listened to it. My eyeballs don't work very well anymore, but I have listened to it. I recommend it highly for your kids, for yourselves. And we just have a fascinating conversation about sort of all the good things that sports can provide as an ancillary part of the education process for young people. Really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you do too. All right, Dan Gold, welcome to the show. I will have introduced you properly before we get started here today. But first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm really excited to go and have this conversation with you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's start way back when. Okay, we're going to dive into your book pretty deeply here. I think it's just got so many good things that young people can learn from it, and we're going to get into that. But let's start with you. So, grew up in the Midwest. What was your first memory of being involved in athletics? Like, what was what would you look back right now? What was that first time that athletics became important to you?
Probably my earliest memories. I remember going up to the corner with my mitt, and the kids in the neighborhood would pick up and play softball. And I think some of my earliest self-identification, who am I? How do I fit in? What's my worth? Was super early on, seen from this prism of playing with the kids in the neighborhood. I never went anywhere without my mitt back then. So I think this was quite common where I grew up, maybe because there wasn't that much stuff to do. But My dad grew up that way. My dad and I were super close. Hope we can talk about that more. He saw the world very much through the prism of sports. I did too. We related very much to each other because of that. So it's just what kids did. You know, you
Yeah.
grabbed your mitt, you went up to the corner, you played, and that's how you kind of figured out who you were, how you had fun, and got an idea how you were going to fit in.
Yeah, let's I'm gonna this is was not on my list of things to talk about today, but bringing up your dad, we'll get to that down the road here. Um, did you play post high school, or was your college career just about academics, or did you play some sports in college as well?
I played 1 year. I played 1 year of lacrosse in college. So no, not really, even though I didn't play lacrosse in high school.
Yeah.
Um, but no, my college career was really about academics. First of all, I wasn't really good. I went to a Division I school. It wasn't really good enough to play sports at that level. And I was pretty focused on academics. Man, I knew when I went to college, I had a good idea what I wanted to do, and it was going to require some serious concentration. But I like to think I had um, an amazing, deep, and wide high school athletic career. I always played sports all the time, and I loved it.
So you said your college required some deep concentration. That's because you were going to school to be a surgeon. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
you knew
Well,
that at a young age?
I did actually. My story's kind of an odd one in that my senior year in high school, we had this thing called a senior project where you could make a case to the school. They'd give you the last 6 or 12 weeks off, and you could go do something sort of career oriented. So kids worked at a bank or whatever. And I had volunteered at the hospital the summer before that. So they had a position in the operating room called a scrub tech. It was basically an operating room nurse without a nursing degree, just a technical job. And I went to the head of nursing there and said, could I do my senior project um, training to be a scrub tech? And she said, yeah. And so I was in the operating room as a senior in high school. Amazing experience. And I don't think you could actually do it anymore today. And some of the first work I did was with a plastic surgeon, reconstructive guy. And I remember watching him do his work. And I thought, I could do that. I think that's what I'm going to do. So at 18 years old, I kind of figured out that I wanted to be a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and that's what I ended up doing.
That's amazing. So you went how long did it take from obviously long career as a surgeon? When did the transition to I think I'm going to write and I'm going to write about sports. When did that start happening for you?
Oh, that is super recent. I mean, I practiced surgery for a while, and then I built an entity, and somebody offered to buy it, so I thought, okay, that's probably a good time to retire, and and I'd always want to go to business school, so I actually applied and went to business school about 20 years ago. And I did a kind of a grown-up MBA and made friends with some smart people, did some investing, got involved in different businesses. That started to feel too much like work. So I retired from that about 4 or 5 years ago. And then a year ago, I just sort of, you know, I journal, I write, I'm at the stage, I guess, in my life where if I don't write something down, I might not remember it the next day. And so I sort of wrote notes that were all sort of directed to my kids. And I realized it's not really just my kids, it's your kids, it's all kids. And I kept coming around sports stuff because sports is just sort of what I love. And I've always been one of those people that thinks that everything in sports is a metaphor for something in real life. So the book just sort of started writing itself. I didn't have any great ambition or design. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to be a writer. I mean, what a cool thing to say to somebody, hey, I wrote a book, you know? And I thought once I give it to everybody with my last name and then my best friends, I thought I would be done.
Yeah.
And then, you know, so I wrote it, self-published, put it on Amazon, and it seems to have touched something in people because
Yeah.
people are buying it and reading it. Actually, if I may say, it's the top, it's the number one sports book on Amazon, completely unplanned, just
It's
sort of
crazy.
came out of
That's a
nowhere.
crazy story. And
Yeah,
over 100,000 copies sold in the first year
yeah, less than
of
a
the
year actually.
hardcover.
Yeah,
Yeah. That I don't believe that includes the audiobook, which I purchased. So that's pretty remarkable. So let's get before we get into it, the you talked about the relationship with your dad. How parents and children through sports can have such an amazing journey together if parents can allow their kids to go on that journey and shepherd them, but not take it for them, right? Like they reliving their own life through their child, which happens a lot. How did your relationship with your dad in sports, how did then that impact how you managed with your kids, their journey through sports, and then how you started to approach writing the book?
Well, first, I would say that I think my relationship with my dad sort of set the template for how I deal with the world, how I deal with everyone. Of course, I'm biased. I'm the only son of this guy, but um, everyone who knew my father loved him and respected him. He was very accomplished, and he was the most down to earth, regular, humble, generous, funny, warm, kind guy I ever knew. And often, when I get to almost always when I get to some point in my life, what should I do? I really just sort of imagine what my dad would do, and I'm usually not far off. And of course, I have my own bias built in, but people still come up to me today and say, are you Alan's kid? What a great guy your dad was. I
Yeah,
mean, I hear
that's
that
cool.
over and over and over, and it means a lot to me. So I think, in as much as I parented successfully, and I don't, time will tell, of course. Um, I think I did my best to sort of pattern, what would Dad do here, and that seemed to be the right answer most of the time. So, just you giving me an opportunity he's passed away now, but
Yeah,
you giving
I
me an
assume that.
opportunity just to talk about him is, yeah, that's a great honor for me. It means a lot to me. And so, my dad had a brilliance in sort of an everyman sort of way. And he had this emotional intelligence, this knowing what to do. And I think a lot of it for him was he was a superb athlete, though he never would sort of talk about himself, never would admit it. But I learned that from his friends who were friends with him when he was earlier in life. He was an unbelievable baseball player. And, he taught me how to throw a ball, taught me how to catch everything. We would go out and play catch in the back. He would send me out for a pass. He was so accurate that I wouldn't even have to open my eyes. The football would land right between both of my hands. I'm not kidding. He
It's
was
awesome.
he was just incredibly gifted and and humble about it. I mean, it's an easy guy to sort of follow in life.
That's cool. Well,
Yeah.
there what you just talked about is what youth sports is supposed to be about, right? There amongst some other things. But it's turned in, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've covered some of this on our show already, that there's some negative aspects that have crept into and it started to influence youth sports. It's a $40 billion standalone industry now. And there's when there's money to be made, there is obviously some bad actors can get involved in
Mm,
sort of creating a negative environment.
mm.
Just a brief from your standpoint before we dive into the good part of sports that we all love, what do you see as kind of the negative component that has come into the youth sports world?
Yeah, I think this is the complicated one. I think there's a lot here because I think there's a lot that's gone wrong, even though I'm really an eternal optimist about this stuff. I think some of the big issues, I can circle back and give some more comments, but I would say some of the big issues are specialization way too early.
I'm glad you
And
hit that one first.
I
I
think that's
couldn't
a
agree
big
more.
one.
Yeah.
And I have thoughts about all these things, but here I think my headline list would have specialization too early, parents living out their own stuff through their kids,
Yep.
the sort
Nailed
of
it.
yeah, the professionalization of
Yep.
sports when it used to be a kid with his bike and his mitt riding up
Yep.
the block,
Yep.
all kind of organized now. I think there's many mental health issues among young people in general. You see a particular brand of them in athletics, and I think there's sort of been this winning at all costs culture. Winning has always been important, but I think you see this emphasis, this culture on winning that 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 I just don't remember when I was a kid, 50 years ago. I didn't feel that sort of pressure to win like I think kids are sort of feeling now. I think the early specialization one, I mean, if you'd like to talk about that a little bit,
I
because
would.
yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot about this because it's so different than the way and I think you probably experienced sports as a kid. The pressure on kids to pick one sport and commit to it year round is, to me, seemed to have exploded over the last 20 years. And the research is pretty clear that it's just not working. That kids who specialize early actually have higher rates of overuse injuries. They have earlier burnout. Paradoxically, they have lower rates of reaching elite levels of sports than multi sport youth athletes do. And the late bloomer who played three sports and came to their best sport at 16 years old with fresh legs, diverse athleticism, and a genuine love for the game, they consistently outperform the kids who were going to skills camp at 18 years old. There's a lot of data that shows that. So the irony is that parents are specializing these kids because they think that this gives them some kind of edge. And usually it ends up doing the opposite.
So what you just said encapsulates everything, every bit of the message that we're trying to get out through this show, and not in a hey, you're beating people over the head with this, right? Because it's a hard world out there right now with the social media, the messaging that's happening to kids, the specialization messaging that you have to do this if you want to be a pro. Getting real information in front of people about the science of what you just talked about is really, really important. And I don't know that I've heard anybody say it quite as well as you just said it. And there I can't remember if it was Trevor Hoffman that we had. I can't remember who it was that said it, but it was the reason they got to where they were, it was him as a professional baseball player, was because of all of the other sports that he had done along the way, and he didn't pitch until he was in the pros.
Yep.
He didn't pitch until he was in AAA, and then ended up being the all-time saves leader in the history of Major League Baseball when he retired.
Mhm.
And so it is just this myth that is being sold so that other people can make money.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's pretty compelling data to the contrary. I think if people want to act
Yeah.
scientific about it, they should be scientific about it. And I don't think there's a lot of data that's supporting, sending Johnny off to tennis camp for 9 months a year when he's 7 years old and him becoming a good tennis player. It's conjectural. I don't really think it's based on really what happens.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, and um, hopefully the messaging. There's a lot of people out there right now that are doing this, and people who have big voices, and hopefully that message will get trumpeted out to the right places, in enough places that we can start making a change back to the way that it was. Because the other part is burnout, injury, overusage, injury, and one of the things that I'd be interested in your thought process on this. We talk about this a lot. One of the things that playing multiple sports does for young people is teaches them how to get up from failure. If I am a third grader and I just play one sport, I am going to be better than the other kids. It's just because I'm doing this one thing over and over and over again. But if I play multiple sports, there's going to be opportunity for me to be not as good, play a different role, fail, get back up, practice some more, hop back in, put myself back out there and do it again, which is what life is, this series of failures and getting back up. And you miss out on a lot of that opportunity if you just pigeonhole yourself into doing one thing over and over again, starting in the second grade.
Agree completely.
Okay, good. All right. Well, let's move on to your book. Um, I love it because, as I said, there's so many conversations out there about the negative, and so I think people think, oftentimes they hear people like me talk and on this subject, that we don't love youth sports, and nothing could be further from the truth. If done appropriately and in a way that is thinking about a young person's development, there's not a better classroom for life than what the classroom that sports provides for young people and coaches to teach those lessons. So let's start with the first one that I think: building character. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this because I always told my teams, and then later on when I'm managing adults, that when you athletics and diversity can or adversity can build character till you're about 17 or 18. Then when you get older, it just reveals your character. When you're a young person, though, it actually can help you build your character. What are your thoughts on how that happens and why is that so important? And is that such an important part of the sports experience?
Yeah, well, I could talk about it through I mean, I'm no expert, but I am a guy who wrote it down and put it in a book, thinking about my kids and your kids, and really built around this idea that the real learning comes in the space in between the successes.
Mm,
It's built around the idea that sports are the setting, but life is the subject. And
mm,
each chapter in the book takes a core theme that teenagers actually wrestle with, like confidence, resilience, leadership, mental toughness, identity, pressure. And it explores those ideas through the stories of real athletes who lived it. So it's a book of stories, which makes it fun
yeah.
and interesting, but really it's an exploration of the building blocks of what it takes to be a person. And the way I put the book together was I chose to pair athletes together in each chapter deliberately because I wanted kids to see that there isn't like one right background or one right path to one of these universal truths. Bethany Hamilton loses her arm to a shark attack and she's back on a surfboard in a month.
It's
Tom Brady
insane.
gets insane. Tom Brady gets drafted in the sixth round by a team that doesn't even really want him, and he becomes the greatest quarterback of all time through sheer discipline and self belief. Monica Seles gets stabbed on a tennis court and somehow finds the courage to come back and actually play in front of a crowd. And these aren't fairy tales; these are real, messy, complicated human stories. And the lessons that I hope the teenagers take isn't it to isn't to be them, which frankly I think a lot of sports books sort of aim at.
Yeah.
It's to look at what they did in that moment and for kids to realize that the same basic capacities exist in themselves. That to learn or to observe that resilience isn't a personality trait somebody's born with, it's a skill that they can build up rep after rep, setback after setback. And so I hope that this book is kind of a training manual for that skill of getting back up, not the not getting knocked down part. We all get knocked down all the time. It's a training manual and understanding the value of the getting back up part. And hopefully I wrapped it in stories that are compelling and entertaining enough that a teenager would actually want to read them, because no kid is going to sit down and read a book saying lessons on how to be a person, lessons in life. I mean, come on, that's not
Yeah.
happening. But
Right.
if we could tell, if we can Trojan horse it, and if we can tell it in a way that's fun for all of us, and provide sort of a language that a kid and a dad, or a kid and a coach, or a kid and a teacher could talk about, they could read the same story and then try to extract some of the lessons from it. Then maybe we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. So the resilience piece, drill down on that a little bit. There is I tell joke with people all the time that my kids in my world today think that having to come downstairs to get batteries from the battery drawer for their Xbox controller is adversity, and that's how they build resilience in real day to day life. That's not really what you need to learn, right? Like there's got to be some lessons beyond that, and athletics is a great opportunity to do that. Why is that athletics environment such a good teacher of that resilience for young people?
Yeah, I think I th- I think first of all, I think the lessons can probably be learned. I'm sure they can be learned in other arenas besides sports.
Totally.
But sports is just sort of this natural place. It's ingrained in our culture, especially American kids grow up, they see it, they want it, they do it. And it's a ball on a tee, if you will, for us using that as a vehicle to teach kids. So I think it's a natural, and it happens to be something I love, and clearly you're passionate about as well. I think a kid who plays sports learns that talent alone isn't enough. They learn that the kid who outworks you will beat you most of the time. that showing up consistently when it's hard and unglamorous is its own form of character. Sports is just perfect for teaching that kind of lesson to someone. Sports can teach them that what humility looks like when they lose, what grace looks like when they win, what accountability needs to feel like when they make a mistake in front of their teammates or their coaches. I think sports can teach kids to manage pressure, to walk up to a free throw line when the game is on the line, or to have to step into the batter's box when they struck out twice before, or have to go back on the wrestling mat when they got pinned the match before. Those moments of pressure and recovery, repeated hundreds of times across a childhood, they can build a kind of inner architecture that serves a person well for the rest of their lives, whether it's the operating room or the boardroom or marriage. The kids
Yeah.
who played sports, I think, they just know how to hold themselves together later when things are really hard.
Let's talk about the parents who are watching their kids build that resilience, because sometimes it's hard to let our children go through those things and we want to jump in and fix it for them, or have a conversation with the coach versus letting the kid have the conversation with the coach, or tell them that someone's playing over them because someone's biased against them instead of asking them what they're doing to earn that. For the parent, what advice and good outcome can come from them allowing that child to build that resilience within that sport without the rescuing of them from the failure, the quote unquote failure that is going to happen.
Well, I think you hit on a big one. Let's start with the premise that all of us that have kids love our kids. Maybe there's some exceptions out there, but I don't hang out with those people. So if
Most
we
of the
start
time we love our children. Yes.
right, so let's start with the premise. Some basic ones, that we love our kids, that it's natural to not want to see our kids experience any pain that is unnecessary. Now, how we define unnecessary is maybe a tricky one. And we like to think that as we become experienced as people and parents, we'd like to save the people we care about from having to skin the knees on the way to the lesson. Um, I would also say that I think most of us really try our hardest to be good parents. I don't think that's an overstatement. And I would even say that most of us, when asked the question, do you parent consciously? We would probably be quick to say, oh, yeah, I do. So I think most of the moves, I'll speak for myself, most of the moves that I made around my kids were made out of love, not wanting to screw something up that they were going to screw up, that I screwed up, that I want to try to save them from. And also, I think I was doing it by trying to look at what I was doing and modify and modulate. But the thing about doing anything consciously is that we don't know what we don't know. And often it takes
Mhm.
somebody from the outside to say, hey, I love you, but I saw you doing that. I don't
Yeah.
think that's really what you want to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think we can work off a basic premise that all these parents, um, they love their kids and they're really trying to do their best, and they're really even trying to look at themselves doing their best. But um, but it's hard. Um, and what do I mean by that? Well, the guy who's standing on the side of the court screaming at his kid while he's dribbling, if we sit back and look at that guy and say, really say, what is that all about? Does he love his kid? Does he want what's best for his kid? Does he want his kid to taste what winning and success feels like? Of course, I think we can assume that. But is there something else driving that guy? Probably.
Yeah.
You were a coach, you probably ran into this all the time. How much of our own ego as frail, imperfect human beings get wrapped up in some of our best, most love-driven efforts. I think parents unconsciously live out their own stuff through their kids,
Yeah.
uh,
I
often.
couldn't agree
And I
more.
and I don't think they realize it. Um, and I don't think they are often open to hearing about it.
And from my experience, it's one of the most damaging things that can happen to young athletes in the relationship with their parents is that, and it's not just this time, but there's the time directly after during games, as you just mentioned, nobody wants to hear their parents screaming from the sidelines, but also that car ride home, that
Yeah.
hour after the game of, the kid wants to hear, I love you and I love watching you compete. I love watching you play, not you screwed this up or Johnny or Susie, it shouldn't be playing ahead of you or your coach sucks or like none of that stuff. There's so many conversations I've had with athletes over the years whose relationship with parents are not ruined, but really, really strained because of that time frame and that adrenaline and emotion that isn't controlled by the parent during and directly after the game. And if parents can figure out how to manage that, have some emotional control around that, just that time with your athlete will help your relationship be better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And my guess is in the hour and a half that we're going to talk to each other, this is probably the single most important thing, in my
100%.
view, that we're going to talk about. This is a particularly emotionally loaded issue because all parents love their kids, of course. But it's also one of the most damaging, as you sort of alluded to. When a parent's self-worth gets tangled up in their kid's performance, that kid stops playing for themselves and they start playing to manage the parent's emotions. And that's a huge psychological burden to put on a kid. And you see it on the sidelines constantly. The parent who's angrier than the kid after losing, or the one, like we said, who's yelling instructions from the bleachers, or the one who's critiquing the game or the kid's performance, in the car in the car ride on the way home, as you said. With those kids aren't learning resilience. Those kids are picking up something much more like anxiety.
Yeah.
The game for those kids is, it stops being a joyful place and it becomes this place of obligation and fear of disappointing someone they love. And these loving, plugged in parents, they're blind to this. And I think this is a real problem. That intention isn't good enough. Loving your kid is not enough. Parenting, as you know, requires some real tough self-honesty and some self-reflection. And a lot of kids, in many ways, are not performing out of joy to succeed in sports. They're performing just so their dad won't be upset.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? And there is a ton of science. There's a great think tank out of Michigan State. Read a bunch of their stuff that studies the parent-child relationship around sports, and the hour after the game is the most important time for that parent and child. There's so much emotion and adrenaline going on, and if parents can just say, "I love you and I love watching you play," and not and push everything else off until that hour is gone, the emotion and the adrenaline starts to wear off, and you have an opportunity to maybe not even have the conversation. But if you do, it's going to be far more analytical. And some kids do want to break down the game with their parents, but not in an emotional way. And then the second thing, your thoughts on this is have the same routine after every single game that you play. If you get ice cream after you win, get ice cream after you lose.
Hmm.
That so that children don't start attaching their worth to the outcome. We want them to attach to the process of what it took to get to competition, and then the outcome of the competition is just the outcome of the competition. It's not their worth. What they should be learning is that their worth is in how hard they work to get to that competition, and sometimes what they did out on that field or that court or wherever they happen to be competing just wasn't good enough. The person across them was better. It doesn't make them a worse person. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that realm.
I thank you for bringing that up. I'm not familiar with the research that talks about keeping the routine uniform, but that makes perfect sense. I think the greater point that you made very articulately is that, if the point of the whole endeavor is winning to the father or the mother, the kid's going to know that, even if the parent never expresses that. And so if that shows up subliminally and like ice cream on the days we win and not
Yeah.
ice cream on the days we don't, that's signaling a very bright young human being what's important to the parent. And even though a parent may not even be consciously aware of that, right? The winning isn't the thing. It's the process, like you said. Look, the big lessons, they don't seem to come to the kids who get it easily. They don't seem to come in the wins. The big lessons seem to come when we fail and have to sort of crawl out of that situation ourselves. And that's what builds the resilience, the how to be a person, how to go through life with all its disappointments and challenges and failures, which we're all going to have lives full of those. Uh, you're not equipped if you have a whole shelf full of trophies and you've never really lost. So,
That's that's right.
maybe ice cream should be on the days when it's really tough and we don't succeed.
Yeah.
Although I don't think the winning and losing should be the criteria for how the kid is rewarded at
Yeah.
all. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's just an interesting it's the psychology, it's supposed to be an ancillary part of the education process for young people, right? And it's become separated away into we have education and then we have sports. It's all about winning and losing. And then we go back to education, that's about education. And then we have sports, it's about winning or losing. And they should be conjoined together and done in a very similar way. You have a test, your game's your test. And if you didn't perform in your test well, you got to do better in class the next time, right? You got to work harder, you got to study more, you got to practice more, do more vocab. Same thing if I don't make my shot on Friday night, I got to shoot more free throws. It doesn't make me a bad person. If I want to make that in that pressure moment, I got to shoot more free throws. So it's just it's those lessons that get lost if all we think about is whether we won or we lost.
yeah, and times seem to be a lot more complicated when you and I were in high school
Oh my
playing
God.
sports. Yeah, and the stakes seem to be higher. When a kid had an amazing performance in a ball game, maybe he was lucky enough to get mentioned in the local paper, right? And
Yeah,
and now these kids are like competing for NIL contracts,
it's crazy.
right? And lining themselves up to go through the portal windows. It's a different world that so heavily emphasizes success and fame and money and likes. And it's a tough time to be a kid. And I hope my book, it's kind of an old fashioned to write a book on sports stories and learn life, but like I think it's still true. I don't think we want to lose the plot as
Uh,
parents of these kids. That the
I love it.
basics still matter.
Yeah, I love it. One more basics from before we dive into some of the specific stories. Talk about how important getting exposed to diversity is
Mm.
from playing sports, and it's one of the things I believe you playing multiple sports as a young person helps provide that experience of being around because each sport kind of has its own culture, different ethnicities drawn to different sports, different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And if I just play tennis, I'm going to be around people who can just play tennis. That there's a group of those people. Being able to have some diverse experiences gives you opportunities to see what the world looks like and operate in a system, in a sport, as a teammate, as an employee or a player of a coach, in a system that is going to look like what their real world is going to look like. As you were writing the book and exploring that, how important was that to the athletes that you were writing about?
Huge.
Yeah.
Um, and um, I'll just address it this way first. I did some research on the idea of writing a book for teens. A lot of people said, like, what are you crazy? Like, that's the last group of people that are going to buy a book and read it. Boy, is that a dumb idea. I had quite a few people say that. So I did some research on what is it kids look for when they want to go consume products like this. And I've had a few things that I read that put the same thing number one. What's the criteria kids are looking for? I was amazed by this. Diversity.
Mm,
Kids are attracted to diversity. So I made sure that the book was diverse. First of all, it's the right thing to do, not only from a marketing point of view, I think from a humanistic point of view, um, to show that these lessons, these general lessons we're talking about, they work everywhere for all kinds of people playing all kinds of sports from all kinds of places across eras. I think sports is a particularly powerful and special vehicle for this diversity thing. Right from the beginning, as soon as a kid's on a team, they're in a locker room or on a field with a bunch of kids that don't look anything like them, different backgrounds, different family stories, different races, different ways of seeing the world. And early on, these kids are asked to trust each other, to learn to sacrifice for each other, to work towards something together. And that kind of exposure, even for 8-year-olds, all on a softball team, it starts to that kind of exposure starts to build empathy, and it does it in a way that no lecture or speech ever could.
It's
I think.
beautiful.
I'm sorry.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think again, you and I clearly were big sports fans and we're
Yeah.
biased, but I think that sports also, especially for young kids who don't want to sit and hear somebody talk about it,
Yeah.
but it teaches them. They internalize that their voice matters, but so does the voice of every other kid. It shows them what being a leader really looks like, not just being the loudest kid on the bus, but being the most reliable one. It shows them how powerful a great mentor is, how a coach or a teacher or just another steady adult who believes in them could profoundly redirect their lives. And perhaps most powerfully, it teaches kids that they are not equal to their performance,
Mm.
that a bad game doesn't make them a bad kid, that getting benched is not the end of their story, that who they become through the struggle is infinitely more important than any trophy that they're going to bring home. They learn that the victories sort of fade from memory, but they see that the character aspects that they develop, those things last. And when sports is done right, it's one of the greatest character building forces I think kids could have.
So your my question was going to be to kind of summarize this, and you just did it without me asking, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In successful K through 12 and K through, meaning whenever you start, sports experience, to me doesn't mean becoming a professional athlete. That's that maybe that happens. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than you do of being a professional athlete. But what to you is a successful K through 12 sports experience for a young person in the family?
Well, to give you one top line simple answer, it's how to be a person.
Mm,
And what do I mean by that? I just think sports teaches the things that balanced, solid members of our community need to have. Sports teaches resilience. It teaches the art of self-discovery. It teaches confidence. It teaches mental toughness. It teaches humility, leadership, perseverance. It teaches what accountability is. It can show them what redemption could be when they screw up. It shows them the value of respect, finding and respecting a mentor, the value of becoming a mentor. Sports teaches them about diversity, inclusion, breaking down barriers, whether they're personal or social or societal. It shows them about developing values, sticking to them, standing up for the values. Sports teaches them about using a platform, should one be lucky enough to develop one, for the good of others. It highlights the real value of effort over talent, effort over results. Um, I think sports teaches identity, authenticity, the value of teamwork, how to handle pressure, how how being vulnerable is actually a strength, not a weakness. It shows them without even knowing that they're learning it, how to be a good, balanced, dependable, contributing, kind person. The kind of people we want to be friends with, the kind of people we want to work near, the kind of people we want to marry, the kind of people we want to live near.
that's awesome. That is mic drop stuff right there. That is awesome. I couldn't agree more, and I've got nothing to add. Coaches normally aren't speechless, but I am. That was absolutely perfect,
Oh,
and
thank you.
and it's the idea. I think it's so important to have this conversation about the good, right? There is so much good, and you just named, I don't know, 30 things that are good about that can come from that sports experience. And not one of them is about being a pro, not one of them is about the parent being able to celebrate. It's all about the character and the development of the young person. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks.
Good job. All right, let's dive into the book a little bit more. Okay. So, number 1, style of writing. This is a little different than our normal topic on a sports uh, podcast, but I'm fascinated by it. When you were going through and thinking about doing this against the better advice, the advice of people that told you teens didn't want to read a book, what
Right.
what what was it that drew you to writing the book in the way that you took two athletes and compared them and told their stories that way? What was that? how'd you get drawn to that style?
The honest answer is I don't really know where it came from, but 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 I think I think many sports books, they sort of focus on the athlete, the trophy, the shine, the money, the glamour. And from the beginning, I wanted to focus on the lesson. This was a dad talking to his kids. So I didn't like pick athletes and say, how am I going to tell their story? I picked ideas and then I went and looked for athletes whose stories helped exemplify those ideas, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
sort of wrote it inside out. So I think one of the chapters is leadership. So then I sat down and I thought, okay, let me come up with a bunch of athletes, whose stories are particularly good for leadership, and many of whom you and I would just know because we're fans of sports. And then I would sit down with AI and I said, okay, I got these 8 athletes who I think their stories are amazing for leadership. Tell me, ChatGPT, name me 40 others. And it would come up with all these athletes that I didn't know, didn't think of, never heard of, thought of them in some other light. And so I started off with probably a pool of a few hundred athletes. And then I started to sort of group them according to what lessons I thought a story about them might teach. And so I backed into this idea of then finding a way to pair them up. And in there, I had other criteria. I wanted them to be diverse with regard to sex, sports, geography, message, time period. I wanted to sort of come at it from all angles. And then the take home from that is that, wow, it doesn't really matter who we're reading about, where they come from, what they look like, what language they spoke. The lessons are kind of all the same. And by the way, me as a kid, like, I can relate to that because I have that kind of feeling in me too. Maybe I wasn't born great, but I was born feeling that. So I think that I sort of backed into this paired narrative thing because and there's 3 paired narratives in each chapter. So there's 6 athletes grouped in twos to teach 6 different lessons around diversity, for example. And then in the end, it all distills into what are kind of the universal truths. And then, if you heard the book, then you know that I try to sort of bring out some reflections. Okay, let's put these all together. Let's compare and contrast these athletes. What are we learning here? And then I even went one step farther and said, okay, kids who are reading this book, let's try to find ways to take these lessons that look to be true, no matter who we're looking at, and see how we can apply them to your lives. So that's kind of how the format for the book came to be. It kind of wrote itself.
That's pretty cool. So, not all of the athletes that you chose to write about are squeaky clean, right? Some pretty Oscar Pretorius, for example, the South African athlete that allegedly and was convicted of I don't know if murder is the right word, but was convicted of manslaughter, I believe, of killing his girlfriend.
Girlfriend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
directly after, not too long after he had his meteoric rise to stardom in the Paralympics. What sort of drew you to a story like that? Like, what was the putting somebody into your book that kind of had that background, as opposed to someone, that we don't hear anything negative about them, going through like a Michael Jordan had some stuff, but
Yeah.
Serena Williams, right? That you couldn't have 2 more different people than Oscar and Serena.
Right. Well, let me start with an aside. A couple of my friends were really irritated to see guys like Oscar Pistorius. One of them said, like, that just pisses me off seeing him in your book. And I get that. And
Yeah.
and but other input I had was more interesting. I have a friend who's a high school teacher. He teaches in the city in New York. And I gave him the book rather early on to read. He's a very thoughtful, honest guy. And he said, he was complimentary about the book. This was before I had published, but he said, the kids that I'm teaching, 15, 16, 14, 15, 16, they are tired of seeing the world in black and white.
Mm.
That is how 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds see the world. And now these kids want to they recognize there's nuance. They recognize actually that most of life is lived in the gray. They recognize that there can still be profundity coming out of conflict. Maybe you should have a chapter on athletes who are a lot more complicated. And I was like, that is brilliant, man. That is, and without that high school teacher insight, I wouldn't have had that. So I went back and I wrote that chapter on uh, on redemption and taking accountability. And so, sort of by definition, for accountability and redemption to happen, there's got to be something rotten in the story to start with, and then it's about sort of, at least in the redemption arc stories, what happens with it. Now, I'm not even sure. Pistorius is the toughest one because I don't hear redemptive arc, but I think
Yeah.
his story does show that people are complicated. They're
Mm,
multi-layered. They're not all packaged and two-dimensional like Snapchat and Instagram would have you believe.
mm.
That the whole thing is nuanced, and it's conflicting, and sometimes we don't know how to feel, and sometimes the lessons are profound and they're very different and they're wrapped around each other. And how do I make sense of that? And to be honest, that's more like real life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about the guy who you love and you hate at the same time, and it's all wrapped together and it's complicated. So I tried to go there, I tried to be respectful of the fine mind of the 15-year-old that wants to start to look at things in a multi-layered way, that and will appreciate that success is not a straight line, that people aren't just all this or all that, and that for many of these people, not all of them, there can be a redemptive arc. Marion Jones, Alex Rodriguez, Diego Maradona, who I write about, they did some bad stuff, but at one point or another, they called themselves on it. They took responsibility. They called out exactly who they hurt, and specified what they did to the people they hurt, and then they tried to pivot and do something good with it. Well, that's what a real grown-up apology looks like. It's not just waving "I'm sorry" and walking on. It's saying, "Hey, I see I did this. I hurt you people. This is exactly what I did, and I hear that. And now here's what I'm going to commit myself to do better." There's a real lesson in there. And if I'm not willing to talk about people who have really screwed up, then I think we're going to miss a whole basket full of really important lessons on how to grow up.
I think that high school teacher was pretty wise.
I
I
think
think,
so too.
yeah, it just seems to complete the whole arc of the book, right? Like there's um, not everything is roses in this world, and I know you mentioned it for our young people. Everything looks like roses through a filter on Snapchat and Instagram, and life isn't filtered. Life can be real, and decisions have real consequences. And being able to see that from people who are, in performing in the athletics world for young athletes, I think can be just as an important lesson as somebody doing it very well and not getting in trouble. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, you wrote the book. So as you were doing this research, is there any story that didn't make it into the book that you wished you would have put in, that people don't know about, that maybe didn't quite fit? Or what's your best story of an athlete that you were just like, holy, you know what, this is amazing? Or did all of that make it into the book?
No, all of it didn't make it in the book. I mean, the book is only 8 chapters times 6 athletes, only at 48 athletes, and I had on my list, I think I had like 300 or 400 to start
Yeah, that's
with.
what you
And look,
said. Yeah.
all of us that like sports, if given enough time, we could probably come up with 4,000 great
Yeah.
athletes, great stories. You were a coach. I mean, the stories and the impressive people just never stop, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're just unbelievable. Um, and I realized also that I was coming up with a lot of coaches, because coaches also teach great lessons. And somebody said to me, "Why don't you write another one about coaches?" So the second book, which came out like 2 months after the first one,
Yeah.
is the same idea really around coaches. So, you know, this is just a bottomless well, I think. So were there lots of people that could have been included that weren't? Like, yes, ad infinitum, we could have. So, I tried to cherry pick to meet the criteria. I want it to be fun, interesting, diverse, find interesting ways that I could weave together to bring out the same life lessons, make it fun. But yeah, they yeah, there's tons of them. So, I had to pick, I had to choose, and but the inspiration to keep writing is there, and I'm in the middle of another one now, and
That's
mostly
what I was
all.
going to ask next. What's next?
Well, yeah. So what's next? Well, I have this personal habit later in life that I like to get up in the morning and I do some readings that sort of center me and set me for the day. And I just found that to be a really nice practice. Gets my brain right, my heart right. And I'm not talking religious stuff. I'm not a religious person. I'm talking about brain space, getting me in a good place. So I thought, wouldn't it be kind of fun to tell these stories in mini once a day form? So I'm just now finishing the next book, which is going to be Game Changers, but a daily reader, where
Mm.
every day, a kid could, today is July 7th. You look up, here's a story, same format. Here's a story, here's the reflective lesson, and then a little takeaway that the kid can say, that the kid can apply that lesson to his day or his week. And it gives me the chance to tell 365 of these stories. And it's really been fun. It's been a lot of work, but I'm getting there. So hopefully within another couple months we'll be ready for prime time. But it's basically 365 metaphorical sports stories on how to grow up and be a good person.
That's cool. Do you think you'll stay? You think you'll branch out now in outside of this kind of genre as a writer? Or do you have any do you have any thoughts about going other direction? Or are you just loving this so much you're not thinking about that?
I don't know. All of a sudden make me ask myself if I'm smarter than I think I am. I'm not sure that I have the ability to go write about anything else. I don't know if I know enough stuff. And maybe another way to say that is there's just so much in the sports world. And and
Yeah.
sports is so compelling and it's such a common language. And two guys that never met before who love sports can sit down and talk for hours, case in
Yeah.
point, right?
Yeah.
So there's something magical about the sports thing. And I know it, I feel it, it's in my DNA, I've lived it. So, and it's easy and it's fun for me. So I watch Sports Center. I'm like, oh, I got to write about that. That's awesome. Um, so I don't know is the answer. I don't make myself out to be some like philosopher or psychologist. I'm not. Um, I'm just doing the stuff that's fun where maybe I can actually move the needle for a few kids. So I don't know is the answer. We'll see.
How do people find the book? How do people find you? Where can they go? Give us all the different spots to find Dan Gold.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you. The little PR section. Well,
Yeah.
we have a new shiny website that's up, gamechangerstories.com, gamechangerstories, just how it sounds.com, and introduces people to the stuff we all talked about. What's important. Here's the books. Here's who I am. Here's what motivates me. We're developing a little coaches area where we're highlighting coaches at all levels from around the countries and telling their story around the
Love that.
country, which is super fun because, as you know, there's so much amazing, great work
Yep.
that happens that doesn't really get the spotlight it deserves. And then for people that want to buy the book, either the first two books, it points them to Amazon. And so if somebody wants to buy the book, it's available on Amazon. You go to Amazon, look under books, type in Game Changers. It's a blue book with a big orange basketball in the front. You can't miss it. That's the place to go get it. And as you know, it's in audio format, so you can buy it in Kindle or soft cover, hardcover, audio, whatever floats your boat. So it's that simple. It's something people are really interested in. They can find it on Amazon. And if they a little more interested in the whole concept and me, they can go to the website and there's a way to contact me. I'm not that busy of a guy. I'm super happy to have people reach out, give me their thoughts, suggestions. I would love to communicate. This is really for me. This is I wish I could tell a grander story. This was my plan and this is what I hope to do. I just wrote some stuff down that went from being for my kids to all kids, and I printed it and I put it out there, and
And
it
it's
looks
now the
like
number
it's,
one selling book on Amazon in the year
yeah,
category.
number one sports book. Yeah, it is.
I love it. That's so awesome. Just sometimes life is just I can tell I've never met you before, but my I'm pretty good at this part of telling you're a good guy. And sometimes
Mm.
good things just happen to good people. And I it's amazing when stuff like that happens. It's pretty cool.
Well, thank you for that.
Well, all right. I've got two things that we end the show with every person that comes on the show. We make you go back in time, go through, get on your, get in your time machine, go back to when you were 13, 14 years old, knowing everything that you've been through. Surgeon, well, athlete, high school student, college student, surgeon, business person, athlete, right? Like all the things, right? What if you could tap yourself on the shoulder at that age and give yourself one bit of advice that you think would have helped you get through all of that? What would that bit of advice be?
One bit of advice. Well, I don't think I could do it. Well, let me do it this way. You sort of you let me know you might be asking me this, which is something no one's ever asked me before. So I sort of imagine it being a letter I would send back in a time capsule to
Yeah, I
myself,
love
you
it.
know?
I love it.
Okay. So
You're a
it might go
writer.
right. So me writing to me in ninth grade might sound something like, "Hey Danny, relax. I know that sounds simple, but it's actually the hardest thing that I'm going to ask you to do. You're going to spend a lot of energy worrying about whether you're good enough at stuff, whether you're starting next Wednesday, whether you're impressing the right people, whether you're smart enough and you measure up. Try to let that stuff go. Even though it might feel like it, the scoreboard is not tracking what really matters. What matters, Dan, is whether you show up fully, whether you gave your best and most honest effort, whether you were fair and kind, whether you were a good teammate, and what you did to learn from the most recent loss you had. Try not to worry too much about the final score when you play a game. Just make sure you did everything you could do, that you left everything out there on the field, and then try to let it go. Focus on the things you can actually control. And honestly, that's mostly just your attitude and your effort. Those wrestling matches where you had to wrestle outside your weight class because you weren't good enough to beat the kid at your weight on your team, those times you got beaten so badly, so publicly, it feels like a failure story. But it's not a failure story, it's a character story. And one day you're going to tell that story proudly, probably on some podcast. The, the, the challenges and the setbacks that you feel are just crushing you now, they are right now building something inside you that's going to serve you for the rest of your life in ways you can't even conceive of yet. So, my advice is to stay coachable, stay humble, focus on being a good teammate, a good friend, be a good son, be a good brother. Don't confuse being confident with arrogance. Real confidence is a quiet thing, and you're going to have to earn it. And don't worry, you will earn it. Find teammates and friends who make you better and be loyal to them. And pay attention, not to the game you're playing, but to the lessons that you're learning underneath it all. Because, Dan, the discipline, the resilience, the ability to perform under pressure, the understanding of what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself, you're learning all that stuff right now, right here on the baseball field. You just don't know it yet. So trust the process. The person you're becoming is worth all the hard work. And just as important, don't forget, have lots of fun.
That's awesome. Ask a writer for give himself advice. You're going to get a chapter. I love it. That was so good. Well, all right. Now, the most important part of the show
Mm.
is dad joke time. So I'm a huge dad joke fan, always have been. And we try to have everybody that comes on the show tell me a dad joke so that I can add it to my repertoire and see if I've heard it somewhere along the line. But you got one? You got a good one for me?
Yeah, I would even ask you, it sounds like you got a lot of good ones. And I
Well,
also I
I'm a
love bad dad jokes.
oh bad dad jokes are the best. So this is the kind of stuff that I get for Christmas and Father's Day for my family. So just a book full of these things. So if
I
you ever
think I,
need
I
some
think
help, just let me know.
oh, I think I would dig that. So yeah, I have a couple good ones.
And get better regardless of if we won or lost. And the most learning happens in between those wins. And if we can figure out a way to help our kids be both as parents or as coaches, get our young people to attach to a process versus attaching to an outcome, we are winning with our children, because someday that's what they need to be attached to, is the process of getting from one thing to the next. And a great thing that sports can teach you. All right. Well, again, thanks to Dan Gold for coming on the show. And if you like what we're doing, share it. Remember, we got a new, it's not a new channel, but everything's under the channel of Next Pitch now. And if you like what we're doing, share it with a friend, give us a good rating. And if you're somebody that wants to come on the show and you're hearing us, reach out and we'll see if we can get you on the show. Please be good to each other. A lot going on out in this world right now, and be good to each other. And until next time, have a great day.